Welcome back to the deep dive. This is the only place where we take the really dense, insightful research, the stuff that usually gets buried in academic journals or these massive 400-page books, and we just turn it into actionable and hopefully guilt-free knowledge for you.
And we've all been there, right? You're staring at this perfectly written new routine.
Oh, yeah.
Maybe it's meditation, maybe it's exercise, or you're finally going to tackle that huge professional certification. You start out so full of hope, you feel that, that surge of motivation.
Totally.
Only to watch the whole thing just completely collapse 3 days later.
Yeah.
And what's that immediate reaction?
Oh, the crash, that familiar, heavy feeling of self-criticism.
Exactly. We tell ourselves we lack discipline, or even worse, that we're just, fundamentally lazy.
Right. And if you have ever struggled with that consistency or felt that deep, uncomfortable guilt about abandoned routines, whether it was that 5 a.m. run, the daily journaling, or just trying to stick to a reading plan, this deep dive is designed to be your intellectual and honestly, your emotional salvation.
Yeah, it's a good way to put it.
Today, we are taking a massive shortcut through this huge body of work that really seeks to dismantle that entire culture of self-blame.
Our source material is Dr. Rahul Deb's really transformative book, Genetic Habits: Why You Do What You Do and How to Do It Better. And this is such a crucial book because it grounds habit formation not just in, motivational psychology, but firmly at the intersection of medical science, neurobiology, and our everyday behavior.
It tells a completely different story.
A totally different story about why we succeed and, more importantly, why we fail.
So our mission today, it's pretty simple, but I think it's profound. We are extracting the most crucial evidence-based insights from this work. We want to completely replace that feeling of shame with actual strategy.
Yeah.
And maybe for the first time for a lot of you listening, provide a compassionate scientific framework for understanding that internal war that so often sabotages our best intentions.
And we are really setting the stage here with a central provocative question that just changes everything about how you look at self-improvement.
Okay, what is it?
What if failing to stick to a habit isn't a failure of character, but it's actually a biological mismatch?
Wow.
What if that struggle you feel isn't moral, but it's fundamentally chemical, and it's determined by the hardware you actually inherited?
That is the ultimate aha moment right there, isn't it? Because that thought, it shifts the entire conversation away from, beating yourself up and moves it toward engineering, towards design.
It absolutely does. And it's so important to remember that Dr. Rahul Deb is an MD. This isn't just theory or, pop psychology. This approach is grounded in verifiable neuroscience and biological reality.
Well, weight to it.
A lot of weight.
Yeah.
And his core argument immediately just flips the script on conventional self-help. He says, look, many habits are not just about willpower or some abstract idea of discipline. They are deeply influenced by our genetic predispositions.
Okay, so what kinds of things are we talking about here?
Things that affect the fundamental aspects of who you are, like your natural energy levels, your motivation thresholds, how you tolerate stress, your inherent sleep cycles, and even how sensitive your brain is to rewards.
The promise here is just immense then. What we're offering you is a shortcut to understanding yourself better than you probably ever have before.
Right.
By understanding your biological blueprint, you can stop fighting your own nature, which is exhausting, and you can start designing systems that actually work with it.
And that's the key. That's how you get to durable consistency. And that's how you finally replace shame with strategy.
Okay, let's unpack this core idea because it really is the foundation of everything Dr. Deb argues. If habits aren't just these conscious decisions we make, but they're the products of these complex, interwoven interactions, what are the core components that interact to form our behavior patterns? I love how he breaks it down into just 3 factors because it makes it so much clearer.
He really synthesizes the process brilliantly. We tend to think of a habit as, a linear choice. I decide to do a thing, then I do it.
Right.
Simple.
But they are the consequence of 3 deeply interacting simultaneous factors. And understanding this sort of triangular interaction is the only way to escape that ubiquitous willpower trap.
Okay, so let's go deeper on those 3 components. What are they and how do they kick off the process?
Well, the process starts with the foundational layer. Your genes. These are the fundamental predispositions we inherit from our parents.
So this is like the factory settings.
Exactly. Think of your genes as the initial operating parameters, the hardware configuration of your brain. They're determining things like the density of certain receptor sites in your prefrontal cortex, the baseline activity level of your limbic system, and crucially, the efficiency of your internal reward circuitry.
So my genes provide the raw material, that baseline capacity for certain types of focus or impulsivity or motivation. They might make one person naturally predisposed to, I don't know, intense, focused work, and another person is just naturally more distractible and impulsive. Precisely. And that genetic baseline, it feeds directly into the second factor, your brain chemistry. This is where all the biological action happens on a minute-to-minute daily basis. We are talking about specific neurochemicals that dictate your mood, your motivation, your reaction speed.
And Dr. Deb focuses heavily on three big ones.
Well, he does. He zeroes in on three crucial actors: dopamine, serotonin, and cortisol.
Okay, let's start with the central player in pretty much any habit conversation. Dopamine. We hear about it constantly, but why is it so central to consistency and habit formation? It's more than just that momentary hit of pleasure, isn't it?
It is, and this is a key point. Dr. Deb emphasizes that dopamine is so often mislabeled as the pleasure chemical. It is, in fact, the motivation chemical.
Gotcha.
Its primary role is about anticipation, it's about seeking, and it's about bridging that gap between the action you're taking right now and some future reward. It's the engine that drives us to do difficult things now for a payoff later.
So consistency is fragile because it requires sustained anticipation.
Yeah.
You have to keep believing the reward is coming.
You do. And this is where that genetic variation becomes so critically important.
Right.
Individuals vary wildly in their dopamine sensitivity. Imagine a spectrum. If you are genetically high on that sensitivity scale, the mere thought, just the anticipation of achieving a small reward, like finishing a challenging task at work, it gives you this massive, palpable motivational surge.
So their brain is super efficient. It's great at translating potential future success into energy for right now.
Exactly. They have a high efficiency feedback loop.
Yeah.
Their system is highly reinforced. Now, let's consider the person with naturally low dopamine sensitivity.
Okay.
They complete the exact same milestone, but the internal reward signal is chemically muted.
Yeah.
It might be intellectually satisfying, sure, but chemically it's just underwhelming.
So to maintain the same level of consistency as that high sensitivity person, they would need what? Bigger rewards, more frequent ones.
Both. They require disproportionately larger or far more frequent external rewards just to match that internal motivational baseline.
And this right here instantly validates anyone who feels like they have to fight harder. Not just to finish a task, but just to get started in the first place. It feels like they're running on empty even when they're fully rested.
They are. They're biologically starting with a significant deficit of intrinsic drive compared to that highly sensitive individual. This is a foundational insight of the book. We have to stop judging motivation solely by external output and start understanding the internal chemical input that's required.
Okay, so beyond motivation, we have the emotional regulation chemicals. Dr. Deb brings up serotonin.
Yeah, serotonin plays a critical role in our mood, our sense of well-being, and just general mental stability. If your genetic makeup predisposes you to lower baseline serotonin, or maybe less efficient serotonin uptake,
You might experience more emotional volatility or anxiety.
Exactly. And that instability directly impacts your capacity for complex, demanding routines. Habits are often the first thing to be discarded when our emotional equilibrium is disrupted. If your brain is busy just managing internal chaos, it has zero reserve capacity left for optimizing your external behavior.
And then there's the ultimate habit killer, the one we all know, cortisol, the stress hormone.
Oh, cortisol. It manages the stress response, and its impact on habit consistency is catastrophic if
Why?
it's not managed. When stress spikes from work, family, just life chaos, our brains are genetically primed to switch from complex, difficult, future-oriented habits.
Like structured exercise or budgeting or learning a new skill.
Right. It switches from those to immediate, comforting survival habits. This is a biological override. You can't just will your way through it.
Can you explain the mechanics of that override? What is cortisol actually doing in the brain that actively shuts down consistency?
This is a crucial detail that Dr. Deb highlights. Cortisol, especially when it's chronically elevated or it's spiking severely, it inhibits the function of the prefrontal cortex, or the PFC.
Which is the CEO of your brain, the part that handles executive functions, long-term planning, impulse control.
All of it, the complex decision-making. When you are under threat, real or perceived, your brain doesn't need long-term planning. It needs immediate action. It needs to survive now.
So my body is literally taking chemical resources away from the part of the brain that's responsible for maintaining my gym schedule or my diet plan.
Exactly. It shunts control back to the limbic system, which prioritizes safety, comfort, and immediate predictable rewards. This is what he calls the chemical cost of willpower. If you have a genetic predisposition for a hyper-responsive stress system, high pressure dismantles your fragile new routines far, far faster than it would for someone with a more regulated response.
Because my brain is chemically decommissioning the very facility needed to run those habits.
Right. You're just seeking chemical regulation, and, ordering a pizza or avoiding the gym is simply a fast, low-effort path to momentarily calming that stress system down.
So genes dictate the size of my initial emotional and chemical response, and that dictates how easily I get derailed by real-life stress. That is a deeply, deeply clarifying point.
Correct. And these two internal factors, your genes and your chemistry, are constantly interacting with a third factor, the environment and repetition. This is the external context, the practice loop, and what Dr. Deb calls the choice architecture of your life. Our environment constantly shapes and reinforces our internal biology.
How does the environment become an active partner in this biological drama?
Okay, think about that impulsive individual we discussed, the one with genetic low focus and lower inhibition.
Right.
If their environment is cluttered, full of easy access to temptations, and is constantly bombarding them with digital notifications, that environment is actively triggering their already sensitive chemical system. Placing a temptation in their line of sight basically guarantees failure, because the combination of that low-friction access and high genetic impulsivity is a chemical trap.
The environment determines whether the brain's preferred chemical reaction is even accessible.
Totally. It's like putting rocket fuel on a small fire. You're guaranteeing a massive reaction with minimal effort. Dr. Deb really stresses that the consequence of these three interacting factors is huge. People naturally differ in motivation, focus, impulsivity, and consistency because their brains are wired differently. This understanding allows us to start with the most crucial step of all,
Which is self-acceptance.
Self-acceptance.
Okay, here's where it gets really interesting, Fernay, because we need to translate this from science into our daily experience. If our neurochemistry is controlling our consistency, how does this scientific understanding help remove the immense shame we all carry when we inevitably fail at something?
It just shifts the framework entirely. It moves you from a moral assessment to a mechanical diagnosis. Think of it this way. If your car won't start in the morning, you don't call yourself a morally flawed mechanic.
No, you look for the broken part, the battery, the engine, the fuel line.
Exactly. And the book provides this essential validation right away with key lesson 1. Habits are not moral failures.
That is such a profoundly powerful, validating takeaway for anyone listening who has felt guilty for years. It means struggling with habits does not signal laziness or weakness or some defect in your character.
It signals one thing and one thing only. Your existing system, the habit design, the environment, or the scheduling, is incompatible with your biological hardware. You are not weak because your brain requires a different level of dopamine signal to initiate action, or because your stress response system is highly reactive. That's just genetics.
So your job isn't to brute force it.
Your job is to acknowledge the constraint and design around it. It is a biological constraint, not a moral failing. And this single realization can instantly reduce that self-criticism that usually guarantees total routine abandonment.
Okay, let's transition into the concept that I think fundamentally challenges the entire self-help industrial complex. Most traditional self-improvement, it starts from this premise that willpower is a resource everyone has in equal measure, and if you just try harder, you'll succeed. Dr. Deb just completely debunks that idea by showing the biological receipts.
He provides irrefutable evidence. The core argument is that the belief that willpower is evenly distributed is, well, it's a myth. Willpower is not a muscle of pure moral fortitude. It is the result of well-managed neurochemistry and energy reserves. It's not the cause of success.
And genetics directly influence 3 critical areas related to personal effort, which means that effort is never, ever equal across the population.
Never.
We introduced the first one, but let's go deeper into dopamine sensitivity. How does this unequal response to reward completely undermine that just try harder mentality for certain genetic profiles?
Well, we have to acknowledge the difference between starting motivation and sustaining motivation. For the person with high dopamine sensitivity, starting is pretty easy, and sustaining it is relatively easy because they get a highly rewarding chemical hit from every small victory.
Every completed chapter, every check mark on the to-do list, every compliment.
Right. This self-reinforcement is a massive free source of energy. They have a highly efficient internal fuel pump.
I like that.
But now, if you have low dopamine sensitivity, the act of starting often feels like pulling a heavy weight. When you complete a chapter, the satisfaction is purely cognitive. The emotional and chemical reward is just flat, or muted.
So that lack of chemical reinforcement means the brain is constantly asking, why bother? The effort wasn't worth the internal payoff. And this leads to that persistent feeling of low motivation, even when you intellectually want to achieve the goal.
Exactly. So asking that person to just try harder is biologically asking them to run a marathon with one lung tied off. They are forced to rely solely on their very limited executive willpower reserves, which get depleted so quickly, while the high sensitivity person is just coasting on this chemically delivered motivation.
And this disparity is why that generalized motivation advice, the kind you hear from motivational gurus who often fall into that high sensitivity category, why it feels like gospel for them, but it feels completely hollow for people with low sensitivity.
The advice itself is genetically mismatched. It's not bad advice, it's just bad advice for you.
That helps tremendously. But where does Dr. Deb draw the line between acknowledging this biological constraint like low dopamine sensitivity and falling into the trap of, excuse making or learned helplessness? How do we make sure this knowledge is used for strategy, not for surrender?
That is the essential nuanced question, and Dr. Deb is very clear. The goal is not surrender. The goal is accurate diagnosis. If you realize you have low dopamine sensitivity, the solution isn't, oh, well, I guess I can't form habits.
Right.
The solution is, okay, this means I must design external reward systems that are stronger, more immediate, and more predictable than the reward systems required by the average person. It transforms the failure from a moral indictment into a specific design requirement.
So it means you have to be smarter about your systems, not that you get a free pass on effort.
Precisely. It clarifies the link beautifully. And that brings us to the second area of unequal distribution, the stress response.
Yeah.
Focusing on that cortisol-driven system of fight, flight, or freeze.
We touched on how stress triggers the limbic system, but what's the chronic, everyday cost?
Dr. Deb introduces this idea of allostatic load. This is basically the cumulative wear and tear on your body and brain that results from chronic stress. If you are genetically predisposed to pump out higher levels of cortisol and to stay in that stress state for longer, your allostatic load is just higher and your baseline capacity for consistency is lower.
So when life gets difficult, the person with high allostatic load and a hyper-responsive stress system, they're going to hit a wall much faster than their peer.
Much faster. Their habit durability is genetically mediated. When the pressure is high, the brain is not interested in achieving your abstract fitness goals 6 months from now. It wants chemical equilibrium right now.
And if your genetic default is to secrete large amounts of cortisol under moderate stress, your capacity for novel, difficult actions just vanishes.
It vanishes. The brain seeks the fast, low-effort path to dopamine or comfort chemicals, often through avoidance or comfort eating. The routine collapses. It's not a choice. It's a biological imperative kicking in.
So if my goal is to meditate every morning, but I had a really high-stress day yesterday, my brain sees that meditation, which requires high PFC engagement, as another stressor, not as a relief mechanism.
That's right.
Meanwhile, ordering takeout or scrolling social media is seen as a fast-acting neurochemical bomb.
It's biological self-soothing, and it's a genetically determined coping mechanism kicking in. Understanding this means you stop yelling at yourself for ordering the pizza, and you start asking a better question. What design flaw in my environment allowed that low-effort, high-reward behavior to be the path of least resistance?
That's such a better question. And finally, the third area of unequal distribution, which is probably the most visible one, energy rhythms or chronotypes. The natural differences between morning productivity larks and night productivity owls.
This biological mismatch is determined by the timing of our internal clock, our circadian rhythm, which controls when our body releases key hormones like cortisol to wake us up and melatonin to help us sleep.
So forcing an owl whose genetic rhythm programs their cognitive peak for late afternoon and evening to adopt a typical corporate lark routine of focused work at 7 a.m. is not just ineffective.
It's actively detrimental to their energy reserves because it's not just about feeling tired. It's about demanding high-level cognitive function when your brain chemistry is still preparing for the day.
You're asking for high-level executive function, like complex analysis or creative problem solving, during a biological trough.
Right. And the cost is that the brain has to expend these massive, painful amounts of willpower just to function at a basic level, which guarantees they have zero willpower left later in the day when the routine actually requires it.
This connects directly to that one-size-fits-all fails lesson. Trying to copy a successful CEO's 5 a.m. routine often leads to chronic failure, precisely because it ignores these fundamental inherent biological differences in energy, motivation, and stress management.
The key to habit success is genetic alignment. The book uses this great analogy of trying to wear someone else's prescription glasses.
Oh, I like that.
They might be perfectly designed glasses, they might cost thousands of dollars, and they might work perfectly for the person who owns them. But if they don't match your specific visual needs, they actively hinder your ability to see. A habit routine is the same. It has to match your specific biological needs.
Let's solidify this with a concrete scenario. Let's imagine two professionals, both trying to establish a habit of dedicated, focused reading on a complex professional topic for, say, 90 minutes every day. They both have the same intention.
Okay, so professional A is a natural lark with high dopamine sensitivity. They decide to read from 9 p.m. to 10:30 p.m. Now, technically, they are past their cognitive peak, so the effort feels a little tough.
Right.
However, their high dopamine response means that the small reward of highlighting an insightful passage or finishing a chapter provides enough of a chemical kick, that anticipation of mastery, to sustain the consistency even on a slightly deflated energy battery.
Okay, now for professional B, a dedicated owl with lower dopamine sensitivity.
Professional B schedules the exact same reading hours, 9 p.m. to 10:30 p.m. For them, this time slot is their lowest energy trough, maybe just before their late-night surge kicks in. The reading requires maximum willpower expenditure just to stay focused and retain the information.
And when they finish, their low dopamine sensitivity means they get a minimal, flat reward kick. They feel exhausted, under-rewarded.
And critically, their high stress response means that every stressful day leads to instant routine abandonment in favor of passive entertainment. It's just too costly.
That is the biology of failure right there. The exact same behavior, initiated with the exact same intention, yields radically different results based entirely on their biological blueprint.
And this is key lesson 2. Biology shapes behavior. Your genes influence how you respond to stress, rewards, and routines. This is why abstract motivation advice, delivered without any personalized context, is ultimately a form of accidental self-sabotage. You're asking your hardware to run software it just cannot support.
This realization leads us to that critical shift in perspective that Dr. Deb introduces. He reframes the entire problem of habit failure as a design flaw, not a personal flaw.
That is huge because it removes the blame from the individual who is exhausted from trying and places it onto the system they're operating in. He emphasizes asking the right question.
Okay.
The old harmful question, the one that's steeped in hustle culture and shame, is, why can't I stick to habits? It focuses entirely on character defect and self-blame.
But the new, constructive, and scientifically informed question is, why is this habit mismatched with my biology and my current environment?
And that shifts the focus immediately to adjustment and strategy. You recognize the struggle as a valuable piece of data about your unique biological requirements, not as a condemnation of your virtue. This reframing is the intellectual heart of the book, it says. Stop criticizing the engine and start redesigning the road so this specific, unique engine can travel it smoothly and sustainably.
Okay, so we've made the diagnosis. A lot of our failures stem from this biological mismatch. What does this all mean for us in practice then? If willpower is unequally distributed and often depleted, the only viable, sustainable solution has to be found in design.
Right.
This is the transition point where Dr. Deb moves from the medical diagnosis to behavioral application, providing these practical frameworks for a personalized approach.
And this is where we see key lesson 4. Design beats discipline really put into action.
Right.
If you have to rely on immense, painful, daily willpower to execute a habit, your habit is poorly designed. It is too expensive, chemically speaking. The goal, according to Dr. Deb, is to build habits that run on alignment and life friction, thereby bypassing the need for that massive conscious internal effort.
Let's spend some significant time breaking down the 4 key strategic areas he recommends for personalized habit building. These are the tools we can use to adjust the road for our specific engine configuration.
The first area is crucial, especially following our discussion on chronotypes. Aligning habits with natural energy cycles. The mistake most of us make is scheduling difficult tasks when we feel like we should be productive, not when our biology dictates our peak cognitive performance.
So if I'm a high-level owl, my critical thinking just doesn't fire up until 6 p.m., I shouldn't use my limited 9 a.m. focus time for something that requires deep sequencing or creative insight.
Exactly. You must honor your natural peak. If you're an owl, your 9 a.m. to 1 p.m. slot should be reserved for administrative tasks, clear communication, or low cognitive load activities like organizing or answering routine emails.
You save the demanding, complex, high-friction task like coding, or writing the core chapter of a book, or critical analysis for your biological peak time, which might be from 8 p.m. to 11 p.m.
Right. And if you are a lark, you block out 8 a.m. to 12 p.m. for your absolute hardest, most important work. If you force complex tasks during a trough, you just waste limited willpower fighting internal resistance.
But if you align them with your peak, that massive reserve of energy, which is biologically supplied by your circadian rhythm, carries the bulk of the effort.
And the habit feels effortless, or at least significantly easier, because you're leveraging a tailwind instead of struggling against a headwind. This principle alone can transform the work output for people who have been fighting their chronotype for years.
Okay, the second strategic area is where the genius of environmental engineering meets behavior, creating low-friction systems. This is like the genetic cheat code for people who suffer from high impulsivity or high cognitive demands for starting tasks.
This is the practical application of acknowledging that genetic impulsivity, or those low focus thresholds. You design habits to be so easy to start that they bypass the need for massive conscious willpower entirely. The initial barrier to entry has to be ridiculously, almost absurdly small.
Dr. Deb heavily endorses this idea of minimizing friction to the point where the cost of not doing the first step is actually higher than the cost of doing it.
Exactly.
Can you give us a few contrasting examples of what this looks like in practice for different types of habits? Say, learning a language versus exercising.
Sure. For language learning, the friction points are often opening the laptop, finding the right lesson, signing in. A low-friction system means the laptop is already open to the language software, and the textbook is on the pillow where you read every night. The decision is not, should I study, which is cognitively demanding.
Right, that's a big question.
It's huge. The decision is reduced to, should I read this page that is already in front of me? You're just reducing the cognitive lift required at the moment of decision.
And for physical activity.
As we've touched on, if the habit is running, the friction points are getting dressed, filling the water bottle, finding your shoes. A low-friction system means you sleep in your running clothes, you fill the bottle the night before and place it by the front door, and the shoes are on the mat.
So for someone with low genetic focus or high impulsivity, that micro reduction in friction, the removal of just the first 5 steps, is often the difference between success and failure.
It's everything. You need to acknowledge that your brain might not be built for high resistance initiation. So reduce the resistance to 0. And this is particularly true when you apply the cortisol principle. If your stress response is high, you will always default to the lowest friction comfort behavior. Therefore, you must make the productive habit the lowest friction path available. You're designing a win. You're designing a win. The third area addresses the challenge of our high expectations versus our internal capacity, especially under pressure. Adjusting goals to match attention span and stress tolerance.
This is so crucial for avoiding burnout and maintaining sustainability. What does tailoring a goal to a specific stress tolerance profile actually look like?
It means recognizing that the societal definition of a good goal, like write for 2 focused hours, might be chemically toxic to someone with a sensitive stress profile. If you have a highly sensitive stress profile, setting a goal to write a 10-page report in one sitting is a guarantee of a cortisol spike.
The prefrontal cortex sees the complexity, it signals panic, and the brain immediately shuts down the task in favor of distraction.
Yes. So the goal needs to be fundamentally non-threatening. Dr. Deb advocates for radical chunking, or what he calls modular goals. If you know you have low stress tolerance, you break the goal down into absurdly small chunks, a single paragraph, or even just writing 3 bullet points, and then you stop.
This prevents the task from ever triggering that fight or flight response.
It does. The consistency comes from repeating that tiny, non-threatening step daily, rather than relying on one heroic effort that inevitably collapses under its own weight.
So it's focusing on the streak of just starting rather than the length of the session.
Exactly. For someone with a naturally high attention span and low impulsivity, they can handle the complexity of multi-step, delayed reward goals. But for others, the goal must be immediate, simple, and rewarding quickly, even if the reward is just the pleasure of having completed the simple, non-threatening step. You are designing a goal that is fundamentally palatable to your specific biology.
This moves us away from the self-imposed pressure of what a successful goal looks like culturally, and toward what a sustainable goal looks like for you, which might be something that seems almost trivial to other people.
Sustainability is the only measure of success in habit formation. And the final area, which ties all these elements together into the most powerful cheat code of all, is designing environments that support genetic tendencies.
This is about using external factors, the world around you, to manage the internal neurochemical world within you. It's the highest form of discipline, really, because it's discipline performed only once during the design phase.
Making the desired behavior the path of least resistance by manipulating your surroundings is absolutely essential. Dr. Deb calls this creating your personalized choice architecture. If you are genetically prone to distraction, your workspace has to be aggressively minimalist. You can't just rely on willpower to ignore visual stimuli. The friction has to be in the distraction itself.
Okay, give us a detailed example of applying choice architecture for a common modern challenge, like social media impulsivity paired with a low focus threshold.
Okay, so this individual has a brain that's wired to quickly seek immediate dopamine hits, which social media provides perfectly. If the phone is on the desk, that low-friction access will win 100% of the time, especially when cortisol spikes.
So the design solution is what?
Physical separation and increased friction. This means the phone is charging in another room, or maybe it's locked in one of those designated time safes during work hours. You are creating a physical barrier to the destructive, impulsive habit, and you're using the environment to remove the temptation's influence over your genetically primed chemistry.
You're leveraging distance and effort to protect your focus. And conversely, you use cues to support the desired habit.
Yes, absolutely. If you want to drink more water, you don't put a water bottle in the refrigerator where you can't see it. You place a clear, visually appealing water bottle directly on your desk, and you keep it full. If you want to practice guitar, you don't put it in the case in the closet. You put it on a stand right next to your favorite chair.
You're using the environment to actively cue the productive behavior, making it the default path.
And Dr. Deb argues that this is the most effective form of discipline because it's discipline once when you design the environment. Instead of discipline every single moment that the temptation is present, you are using strategy to bypass the need for that moment-to-moment heroic effort, which is chemically finite.
This approach really isn't about making extreme overnight changes, which often provide a short-term dopamine spike but are just chemically unsustainable. It's about making these small, sustainable tweaks that are informed by a deep self-understanding.
And that accessibility is the real strength of the book's strategy. It provides realistic habit strategies that are highly accessible. It avoids overly technical academic jargon while remaining absolutely science-based, which ensures the knowledge is immediately applicable to the listener who is frustrated and desperately needs a new approach.
Okay, let's talk about the meta-narrative of this work, because it seems to fundamentally redefine what self-improvement even is. The major theme that comes through is compassionate self-improvement.
It is, and that concept is so necessary in today's demanding culture. The driving force behind the book is explicitly removing shame from the process of change. The historical narrative has always been, if you failed, you just didn't want it badly enough.
And Dr. Deb provides the biological counterpoint. You failed because your system was poorly designed for your specific, unique biological needs. The struggle was real, and it was chemical.
Exactly. And the resulting benefits of adopting this understanding are massive. It leads to genuine self-acceptance, which then leads to sustainable consistency, and ultimately to long-term behavior change that doesn't rely on constant energy-sapping internal warfare.
The chemical cost of constantly fighting your nature, forcing a low dopamine brain to act like a high dopamine brain, or forcing an owl to be a lark, it's not only exhausting, it leads to this chronic depletion of your executive function reserves.
It does. When you align your habits with your chronotype and your reward sensitivity, you free up massive amounts of cognitive and chemical energy that were previously just spent on internal resistance.
Right.
That is the sustainable path forward.
And we see this reflected heavily in the reception and the reviews of genetic habits. Based on the consensus, the book is often described as a kinder, evidence-based alternative to hustle culture.
That is the perfect encapsulation of it. Hustle culture demands that everyone operate at maximum output at all times, completely ignoring the fact that biological reality dictates different resting periods, different focus peaks, and different motivational inputs for everyone. This book provides the scientific rebuttal to that.
It's praised for being relieving and profoundly validating, especially by readers who have chronically struggled with consistency, precisely because they've internalized the belief that they were just lazy or incompetent.
The specific positive feedback examples really drive this home. You see readers quoting things like, "Finally explains why all the generic self-help advice never worked for me, and this knowledge removed deep-seated guilt from my self-improvement journey."
That relief of being told it's not your fault, it's your chemistry is just incredibly powerful, and it's necessary to motivate that next strategic attempt.
It gives the reader permission to stop self-flagellating and start experimenting strategically, treating their own life as a customizable design project instead of some kind of moral test.
So let's connect this to the wider critique of the self-improvement landscape. The book explicitly debunks toxic productivity culture by injecting this biological reality into our expectation of output.
By grounding success in biology, Dr. Deb emphasizes that biological limitations are real and they are varied. Expecting identical output or identical routines from every single person is fundamentally unfair and, more importantly, it's chemically unsustainable.
So the book advocates for productive alignment rather than just productive quantity.
Right. It acknowledges that some people genetically need more sleep, or they have lower intrinsic motivational thresholds, or they crash harder under stress. And that success is simply achieving your goals within the constraints of your unique hardware configuration.
Now, while the book is transformative for most, we should probably briefly mention the limitations that are addressed in some other reviews, just to provide a balanced view.
Of course. The limitations are generally minor, and they relate to the scope of the audience. For advanced readers, particularly those who are deep in molecular neuroscience or specific gene variant studies, they might find the genetics explanation a bit broad.
They might want more technical details on gene variants like COMT or MAOA.
Exactly. And Dr. Deb consciously keeps the science accessible for the general reader rather than delving into that level of technical specificity.
And what about the audience it doesn't really focus on?
It spends less emphasis on the extreme high-performance cases. The ultra-elite athletes or founders operating at the very edge of human capability, because it is primarily aimed at helping the general reader achieve sustainable, guilt-free consistency in everyday life. Its mission is to normalize the struggle and provide applicable solutions for the majority, not to optimize the top 0.1%.
So for the vast majority of our listeners, the accessibility and that compassionate focus are massive strengths.
Oh, absolutely. It makes that complex connection between your DNA and your daily decisions understandable and immediately applicable. And it proves that self-understanding is, indeed, the ultimate shortcut.
Okay, before we wrap up, let's quickly recap the 5 key lessons that really define the strategy of genetic habits.
These are the 5 foundational takeaways that can shift your relationship with consistency forever.
First, the foundational shift. Habits are not moral failures. Struggling means your design is flawed or mismatched, not that your character is weak.
Second, biology shapes behavior. Your genes fundamentally influence your required energy rhythms, your response to stress, and your threshold for reward. You have to understand these influences first.
Third, one-size-fits-all advice fails. What works for the high dopamine lark will likely fail for the low dopamine owl. Your routine has to be uniquely custom-tailored to your individual biology.
Fourth, the solution lies in engineering. Design beats discipline. Reduce friction to zero, increase alignment with your nature, and consistency follows naturally without relying on painful, heroic effort.
And finally, the overarching lesson. Self-understanding is the shortcut. The more accurately you understand your body and brain, your own hardware configuration, the easier and more sustainable change becomes.
It's a system built on acceptance and strategy, grounded in medical fact. It is inherently more sustainable and more compassionate than a system built on shame and willpower.
So our final verdict on genetic habits is clear. It offers a scientifically sound, compassionate alternative to that cycle of boom and bust habit attempts. It doesn't promise some instant superhuman transformation, but rather a sustainable long-term way to change without self-blame.
Yeah, it's essential reading for anyone who's frustrated with chronic habit failure or just feeling burned out by the pressure of toxic productivity culture. This book gives you intellectual permission to be yourself and provides the tools to build a life that truly works for the person you biologically are, freeing up energy that was previously spent on all that internal conflict.
And that leads us to our final thought for you, the listener, to mull over. If your brain chemistry makes starting difficult, if you know you have low dopamine sensitivity or a high stress response profile, what is one single, low-friction, almost absurdly small environmental change you can implement today to honor your natural tendencies instead of trying to fight them?
Don't think about adopting a massive new routine or waking up an hour earlier. Think about the smallest possible design adjustment that bypasses the need for willpower entirely. Is it putting the resistance bands on the floor next to your bed instead of in the drawer?
Is it pre-filling the paper for tomorrow's writing session and just placing the pen on top of it? Find that singular point of friction, eliminate it with design, and stop fighting your unique hardware. That's the deepest, most productive dive you can take today.
Thank you for joining us for this deep dive into genetic habits.
We'll catch you next time.